Welcome to Adapted, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is
Pat.
And KJ.
Today we'll be discussing Cold Spaces by exploring The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo from 2005 is the first book in journalist Stieg Larsson's Millennium Trilogy, which was published after his untimely death. He died fairly young and was known as a journalist. He was sort of a Swede who investigated a lot of right-wing political groups, and that's how he became famous. And then he died and had this trilogy of books that made him internationally famous.
Well, that explains a lot.
It does explain a lot. Oh, yes, it does. And yeah, one could imagine the main character is sort of a stand-in for Mr. Larson, or at least how Mr. Larson would like to see himself. But anyway, these books follow the punk computer hacker, antisocial detective Lisbeth Salander and her occasional lover and journalist Mikhail Blomkvist. In this book, Blomkvist, while waiting to serve his prison time as a libelist, is hired by Heinrich Wanger, an aging industrialist, to solve a 30-year-old cold case, the disappearance of his niece Harriet. Sounder gets involved as the two attempt to track down a possible serial killer while battling a hostile media on an island on the backside of nowhere. Okay, so this book, more than any we've read so far, I think works on social problems. The movie may be less so, but certainly this book does. I mean, every section of this book has at its section break a statistic about sexual assault or abuse in Sweden, and the prose kind of leave nothing to the imagination in terms of the fact that we're dealing with an author who is deeply concerned with misogyny and how society does or doesn't deal with these problems. We talked a little bit about more grand social ills with Chandler and Hammett, who they're also dealing with a corrupt society. But I don't believe either author, especially not Chandler, is concerned with a specific social problem, which is how social problem works work. They look at some kind of specific social ill. It seems like Chandler is more interested in a kind of modern look at good versus evil and how good men have to deal with inevitable evil. This seems to be more about a very, very specific type of problem. And Larson's book is sort of employing the locked room detective story. It's a locked island detective story, but still same idea. They even mention Dorothy L. Sayers in the book at one point. But he's using this kind of form to deal with these social problems. And I think it's also worth saying the original title in Swedish of this book is not The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but Men Who Hate Women. That's actually what the title translates to. Um, so, can we talk about how Larson's book is dealing with these kind of social problems, or the change between this book and past weeks, past models of detective stories? Because I do think our cold space is a big break in what we've seen before. I think it's also a major difference between the book and the movie, which I don't think is quite doing the same work that the novel is doing.
The movie has a more. I mean, it's a bit more. I mean, it's not that it's shying away from the violence that's there, but it's sort of a bit more voyeuristic. I don't think you're meant to be uncomfortable with it, but you're also sort of not meant to turn away. You're meant to sort of see it very clearly. And I think in the book that's there too. But the book is, as Tom, as you pointed out, Tom, like the fact that each section starts with some sort of statistic about violence towards women makes the point. It is very much making a point. There is that in a very specific point. Um, it's like the previous ones we've looked at, they almost sort of have this, they're a bit more, it's not quite the right word, but I'm gonna go with it now. It's almost like mystic, or almost
Mhm.
this sort of like Platon, like a Plato, kind of thing, where it's like it's just sort of these different ideas and just kind of talking about them, and they kind of float in good and evil, right,
I
wrong.
think Chandler works that way, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I agree. Chandler's definitely doing that. Hammett, I mean, the Hammett, who we didn't actually talk about, Hammett definitely has more of a social point especially in some of his sort of earlier stuff. He's definitely making very much a social point.
And
He's
it's
sort
a
of made.
class point too, as we talked
Yeah,
about
he's making a
before.
class point. He's making he was a communist and he's making a point about that's sort of the specific message he's trying to get across. Now, it's a lot. This is the thing I don't like about the book. It's a lot less heavy-handed. He's making his point, but it's sort of integrated into the narrative. This author really wanted. And again, I wonder if because since the author died before it was actually published, I wonder if those were in his original work or whether something his publisher added because they do feel a little heavy-handed. They're a bit hitting you over the head to make sure you're getting the point that this is not just a novel, it's a novel with a social point, and he's kind of hitting you a little hard with it. But so it's definitely a significant departure. Uh I liked the novel. I think I kind of realized that I have my issues with it. There are definitely some it has more its problems tend to lie more actually with the writing, I would say. It's
Yeah.
part of the heavy-handedness. It's partially as I was noticing as especially towards you get to the end of the book, you can kind of see one of the problems even if you don't read it. You can literally just flip through it and be like, huh, each little chapter, each little section is like a third of a page. And it's just like she ran into the room and she picked up her computer and then she saw this thing and then they ran out and then they went and then it's just like cuts and then it'll be like Blumquist was walking around and then it'll be like three-quarters of a page of him walking around an office and then it's like cuts back to another character and it's like a third of a page on that. It's so jumbled and it just feels like the author was like, I gotta just finish this story. And whereas if you look at the beginning, he's got much longer scenes, whereas especially as you get further on. So it's got its issues, but I realize what I really like is I really like the cold spaces because I really like the cold and the dark. If I had my druthers, I would move to I follow an Instagram account where it's this like couple and they live in an island. I think and might even be I think it's actually might be Sweden. But it's Nordic and it's inside the Arctic Circle, so they get like darkness from like October through March, and it looks awesome. Like, oh, I should move there. That looks lovely. The sun never rises. It's cold. That's where I should live. So I felt like I especially enjoyed the beginning of this book for that reason. I actually really like the setting. I just think it's a really cool space, cool, cold space to be in. It just does feel like a really great space. I also realize I really do like, and maybe we can talk about this a little more. I like the structure of these stories, and I hadn't really thought of it before, but I really like the structure of these kind of stories where this is why I liked KJ's idea last week when he was saying his adaptation. I like the idea of putting together mysteries of something that occurred 30, 40 years ago. I think I really like that. And I think we can talk about it a little more as to how that works. And there are other films, there's other books that do it, but I really like that aspect. So overall, I liked the book. I thought the book was fun. It had some significant issues, I think, but it's a good story.
What I appreciated about the book, I think I liked it a lot less than you. What I appreciated about the book was the way in which the mystery is sort of inside of this bigger social crisis, this bigger media crisis. And the two end up interrelating and relating to one another in a larger way. I like that, and I like the way the book was able to sort of remain thematically astute throughout that. The problem is it is very heavy-handed. You know what he's going for, there's no real mystery to it, and as a consequence of this, you get a very sort of black and white kind of characters. And when you're dealing with or trying to honestly deal with a social problem such as pretty brutal sexual assault, um, it's easy to get cartoonish, but it's also a huge, huge problem if you're trying to deal with this issue honestly, right? So the main villains in this book are not only raping and murdering children and and raping and sexually assaulting family members. They're also the child and grandchild of Nazis and terrible industrialists who are supposed to dislike, even though these are probably the better industrialists. And having, I mean, I think the point where I really kind of rolled my eyes was when you see like the grandfather is a Nazi in the family, right? And that just it makes something that's so really serious and horrible makes it feel silly. Like you can't just help pushing all of the things you dislike into this giant pile in order to discuss it. Well, with really good social problem works, and we've talked about Doll's House before on this show, I think we have anyway. Um, there's no villain or hero. Torvald, who's in really bad productions of Doll's House, Torvald, the husband, is seen as adult and kind of a bully. That's a really bad production. That's not how you should play that character. The issue is far more subtle and difficult. And I think that's what the best of social problem stuff can do. In this, it's just it's so blatant and so obvious, that I found the social problem aspect to be both the most important part of it and the strongest departure from what we've done in the past, but also it's a big problem just because it's really, really hard to deal with these issues in a way that doesn't either come off as overly brutal, overly simplistic, overly forgiving of people who shouldn't be forgiven, or just overly cartoonish. And that's where I had a struggle. The other struggle I had was I find the main male character to be really irritating. He just really got under my skin. There is a sort of like,
It's Mary Sue. He's got the Mary Sue quality.
yeah, yeah, he's,
It's like he's every woman he meets wants to sleep with him. Like
mm,
literally. It's like I think I was like the number of times where it'll be like, and her eyes lit up when he walked in. Like it was so many times that there was like some woman's
mm,
eyes sparkled when she saw him. And I'm like, it's like every woman this guy meets,
mhm,
including like the coffee shop lady, the like the
mhm.
Stacy's mom who lives across the street from him. It's like everyone he meets.
And they cut it out of the American movie
Yeah,
with
they
some
cut
of
it out
this.
because
Yeah,
it's so
thank God.
ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, he has an extra sexual relationship in the American movie they just didn't have time for, it seems. I don't even know. Yeah, I guess that's why they cut it out. They just didn't have time for it. But those are my main problems. I really did like the detective story and the solution. And I also found not hers so much, but his techniques of putting it together to be mostly believable that somebody wouldn't find that in 30 years. Like there's just certain photographic negatives that he as a journalist and as an editor of a magazine would know to look for. And like some guys would be like, there's other photographs? I thought we saw all the photographs, all the photographs of the photographs that were published. And he would know, no, there's like hundreds of negatives that nobody ever looks at because that's how magazines work. And so it made sense that that this man would be able to deal with a 30-year-old cold case. I found that believable. Um, and interesting also. Like his putting the pieces together was fine.
I have to say the one aspect though that drove me up a
Yeah, I
wall
know what you're
because
gonna say. Yeah, go
which
for it.
is so the thing that drove me absolutely up a wall. So I would agree with Tom. I mean, I guess I just ignored the social aspect of it. I got it. It's there. I just kind of was like, okay, I got it. I know what you're trying to say, and I kind of moved on from it. It wasn't. I agree. That was not going to change my opinion on anything. It was not going to expose a problem that I didn't know already existed. It wasn't going to change my opinion on it. So I just kind of maybe for other people it would, but for me, I just went, okay, I'm going to just read it as a story. So I would agree with that. But there's one moment where I went, this is absolutely bonkers. And I go, this is just lazy. They have the whole thing where he finds the Bible verses, right? And he finds out, and he's like, oh, there's these five people that were killed. And he figures out who one of them is because he's heard about how she died earlier. So he figures out one of them. And he's like, I can't figure out who the other ones are. So he goes and he says, I need a research assistant. And is this the thing that you were going to say?
It was a little more general, but go for it. Go for
Okay,
it.
so he
Wasn't,
says
yeah.
so he brings in they bring the research assistant in, and she says, okay, I'm gonna go try to figure this out. And she's looking at the name. She goes, I have no idea what to do. And so the very first thing she says, I'm just gonna try to Google it. And the very first name she does, she puts like Magda murder, and it immediately pops up with like six Google stories. And she's like, now I know what that one is. And I'm like, why did he need her? Why didn't he? There is no way this man would have been like, I need to go to the lawyer of the man who hired me, tell him he needs to go spend 50 grand to go hire me a research assistant, and I haven't even Googled them yet. Like I didn't even type in Magda murder. Like he didn't do anything.
In the book, is that how he hires her? He goes to the lawyer?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
because and I'm jumping around a little bit.
Please.
In the US movie, that's also how it happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I watched the Swedish movie.
Mhm.
In the Swedish movie, she emails him and says, hey, those are Bible verses, you schmuck.
No. In the book,
No,
it's the daughter
it's the
notices
daughter. It's the
them.
And
same thing that
same in
happens in the
the
movie.
in the
Yeah.
In
the
the
Daniel
American
Craig movie.
movie.
But I liked that change then in the Swedish movie because he gets angry and is like, "You hacked my computer." The only way you would know that is if you hacked my computer. He gets angry for a second and then says, "Hang on," and he goes to her apartment, which is a little weird. Instead of just emailing back and saying, "Hey, thanks. Do you want to work for me?" But he goes to her apartment and says, "You shouldn't have hacked my computer, but do you want to come work for me?" And that's how the connection is made in the Swedish movie.
Yeah, the you hacked my computer, however do you want to work for me actually does happen in both the book and the
It's in
American.
the movie. It's in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, movie. It's because it has to do with something she finds out on his computer that was never off his computer. That has to do with the law case. And
It's
so
mentioned only in like passing. It's sort of skimmed in the movie. It's made a much clearer in the book. I don't think I would have noticed it.
I think tying it to the Bible verses makes a lot of sense compared to.
but
I don't
why
think he
would
has
she
a daughter in the
know?
Swedish one, because
Oh, really?
yeah, I'm pretty sure there's no family like that
I think they just wanted to cut the character
in
because
the
the
Swedish
character
one.
doesn't totally make sense.
But I don't know why she's following him. But right, she's hired to investigate him, so she hacks his computer, and then she becomes interested in the case he's working on. So she's constantly just getting an update every day by hacking in and seeing what's up,
Hmm.
and then she kind of gets frustrated that he doesn't realize they're Bible verses, so she emails him because it's
Oh.
driving her nuts a
In the
little bit.
book, I think she's also hired because she's working with him at one point. She's also following him and trying to figure out what he's doing because she thinks he was set up by the, Vatergott, the that guy.
Hmm.
And she's wants to sort of see like, oh, was he set up? Like, what was the story? So they sort of have her also cursorily there.
Hmm.
They make some changes, but
In the 2009 movie, in the Swedish movie, again, I think this makes more sense. My understanding was Wagner hired her through the lawyer to check out what's his name, Bolkovitz, not Bolkovitz.
Blomquist,
What is it?
Blomquist.
Lumquist.
Blomquist.
Mhm.
To check out Lumquist to see if he would be okay to bring to the island and check
Yeah,
out the
that's what
murder.
Yeah,
happens. That's
that's
what
Yeah.
what
happens in all
happens
of
in the
you.
book too. Hmm.
So that's how
Yes.
she fits into the picture from the beginning, and then in the movie they tie it together with the Bible verses, which I that felt better to me than, hey, I need an assistant. How about this person I kind of met once in a conference room?
Well, the lawyer recommends her,
Yeah,
and
but
that's
the
how
lawyer
he.
doesn't know her that well. Like that's a weird
But he's so
recommendation.
impressed with her report. She wrote
Yeah,
the report on him and was like, this report was so thorough. She found out everything.
It's also kind of brass of the lawyer. He found out everything about you. I'm gonna see if she wants to come work for you. Like, it's
The
kind of
lawyer
weak.
is also kind of presented as a little bit of a bumbler. Like he messes up a bunch of times and he drops information he shouldn't drop like a few times. So it's not, I don't think that's accidental that he would be like, I should totally do this. And it's like, that's probably a bad idea. But he does seem to make mistakes a few times. And I don't think it's accidental.
I think he's supposed to be set up, and this is a little more clear, I think, in the movie than the book. I think he's supposed to be set up as a suspect. I think the Larson is putting him forward as potentially his bumbling is not bumbling; it's purposeful
He's trying to get him
mistakes.
killed. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that in the movie they actually make a beat out of it, where they're like, okay, you're going to go to the archives and look at it, look at Frode, look at the lawyer, and they go, I don't think that's in the book, but it makes sense. It makes sense that he's kind of a red herring character. Um, in terms of like the stuff with the Bible verses and the daughter, that kind of makes I think that makes sense in
I
the
think they just didn't want to
daughter
have the
make.
character. I think they just didn't want to have the character. It's also more obvious in the book because, again, I don't know if this, I don't think I would have picked up on exactly what was going on with the daughter if I hadn't read the book and I saw the movie. It's supposed to be like, I think they're making a very clear thing where like the daughter is starting to become super religious and Blumquist doesn't like the fact that she's becoming super religious and he like doesn't, he thinks she's like joining a cult and he's really uncomfortable with it. And it's clearly meant to tie to sort of the religion thing going on with these murders. And so that link was made a lot more clear that they, the which again, it's a little heavy-handed. It's not the best written book. It's his attempts to make parallels between their these lives and the murders and this kind of stuff is a little heavy-handed. So it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. She's getting religious and there's a religious aspect to this murder. Like you kind of hit me on the head with that a little bit. But I think that's what it was a little more obvious that that's why the daughter was there. But in the movie, it's just sort of like She just kind of shows up. Like when she showed up, I'm like, I don't remember. Who is this? I'm like, oh, it's the daughter. I totally forgot he had the daughter. And I
Yeah.
just finished the book an hour ago. And it's like, I forgot she was there. So when she
Yeah.
showed up in the movie and then she shows up again later, I'm like, this character has no business being here. This is also one of my big complaints about the book. Again, I liked the plot, the structure. I like this atmosphere, but the characters are almost interchangeable to some extent, especially the family. Like they're all, I think to your point, they're all either like evil or sort of mysterious. And you just kind of, you could pull most of them out and plot them other characters into their spaces, and it would be like, I wouldn't have noticed that you changed them. Like there's no major, they all have some sort of characteristic or some thing that happened in their past, but that's sort of it. There's no real character to them. Like obviously the girl with the dragon tattoo, what is her name?
Lisbeth.
Lisbeth.
Lisbeth Salander.
She Yeah, I'll just go with Salamander. I can remember that. I had to the whole time I had to be thinking of Salamander and like, like blooming or like Bloom's Day or something because I'm like trying to remember the character's name. Um so Salander has a definitive character. Like she does have, some characteristics. She does get some sort of backstory. It's again a little Mary Sue, and the same thing for Blumquist. There's a little bit of just like everything sort of even when things go horribly wrong for them, they just handle it. They just know what to do, to sort of get back and do handle their situations. Like it does kind of have that feeling to it a little bit. But, she does have some definitive things that happen to her and she has to sort of overcome them. So I did feel like she has some characterization, but a lot of the characters don't.
Yeah.
They don't do very much.
And I agree. The book includes a family tree so you could keep track of these people, but it's not
I never
necessary.
looked at it. I never looked
It's
at it.
it's not necessary unless, because none of them actually feel like suspects. You don't look at the arrangement of people in the family tree and think, well, which ones are alive? Because those people could possibly be it, or these people can't possibly be the murderer. It's kind of irrelevant. I don't even know why the family tree's there. They go back, I think, 4 generations or something like that. You're like, why is the great grandparents listed? They're unimportant. But
They were Nazis.
no, the
I'm
great
kidding.
grandparents
I
weren't. The
know I'm kidding. I know
grandparents
I'm
were
kidding. I'm saying.
Nazis. You should have looked at the family tree. Then you would have known you're Nazis. But I wanted to actually go back to the religious thing. KJ, why did you think the having Lisbeth or Salander find the Bible link made more sense than having the daughter recognize it?
Few reasons. Number one, it gave them instant tension. So he hires her.
Oh,
He
so they're
chooses
angry at each
her.
other. Yeah.
Right off the bat. So he still hires her, but they're a little standoff. I mean, she's standoffish, but they're a little standoffish for that reason. Second, it just felt way more natural than, like Pat was saying. I don't remember the daughter in the beginning of the movie, so it was like, all right, well, we need him to know their Bible verses. How are we gonna do that? I don't know. Just have a kid come up and say, "Oh, they're Bible verses." Like, it just felt really
The
strange.
big thing I will agree though that it really does help is I agree. It doesn't make any sense. But you're totally right on the fact that the tension is immediate because they actually have a direct interaction with each other, whereas the other interaction is through the lawyer. Like character development through lawyers is rarely
Right.
it's rarely going to be tension. It's really going to be tense. It's not really going to drive things very well. So that's actually a really good point that actually having them directly interact in a sort of in that sort of scary way that like someone's been on my computer
Right.
is a much more visceral way to handle that. I
It
think.
also establishes her as a hacker a little bit better because it actually affected somebody. It wasn't just a report, right? In the other one, it's like, oh, she's a really good hacker. Look at this report she generated. It's like, oh, okay. Whereas this one, right? This guy gets an email with stuff that he thought was only on his computer, and he's like, what? And like, you can imagine that happening to you, how that would make you feel.
Yeah,
It just
I agree. I agree
right.
entirely. I think that's a much
So,
more effective way to handle it.
yep, yeah, I
I
like
think
that a
if
lot
you
better.
had, maybe it would have gone through more work, or maybe it wouldn't have. I think if you really had a really good editor who kind of sat through and, if he had lived through the publication, and I don't know how much work they would have done with it, but I feel like if you had a really good editor who just went like, you got to cut this, you got to move this, you got to change this doesn't work. I don't know if they just didn't do that because they're like, well, he can't do the rewrites. So we can obviously do some work on it, but we can't have him do rewrites. And if they just said, you know what, this thing's still going to be gold no matter what, let's just publish it in its current form. I wonder if that's part of the reason some of this stuff stayed, or maybe they just wouldn't have fixed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know how you redeem the Mary Stu stuff, but I do think Salander is an interesting character, a much more interesting character in both versions. I think I actually like her a lot more in the movie, and I'd be
She's
interested
much more interesting in the movie.
much more
She works
interesting.
much more effective in the movie.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear KJ more about the Swedish version of her. That actress was originally offered the role and actually turned it down for the American version. Um, but I think it's just the movie knows how to focus more on her. What when you realize how capable she is, I think is with the advocate who takes over her case and how she has to handle his predations. That's where you see her as being incredibly capacious. And in the book, that scene is really kind of brutal to watch, and it's brutal in the movie, but it tends to focus more on the individual, and we get to see her pain and her revenge through her as opposed to through the kind of sexual act, which has this kind of lazy writing, and it's very unpleasant to read. And I think that's why that's it seems like Fincher and Mara, who played Salander, does know how to handle that character much better than he knew how to write her. He sort of came up with kind of a pseudo superhero who experiences assault, and she seems much more kind of vulnerable and alive in the movie. I don't know, KJ, what did you thought about the Swedish version of her?
So I don't know if this is her character or just more the resources she pulled from. So in the USA version, she gets her Batman toys, her James Bond gadgets from her computer nerd friend. I don't
Yeah,
know if
that's
that's
in
in
the
the book
book.
too. In
Hmm.
the Swedish version, she works for a company that's high tech investigation. So she gets it all from there. That felt way more natural than having to go to some neckbeard, stereotypical.
Well, that was the Matrix moment. That
Right.
was the like,
Yeah.
So she only
Yeah.
goes there to know that her computer is unfixable. She doesn't get the tech gadget there, which it makes so much more sense that the high tech stuff that fits in a button or fits in a bag comes from a company that's what they do, as opposed to the black market of these, these high tech things that don't feel high tech anymore.
well, it's like some of it comes from the company. So like the cameras come from the company, like the camera she gets that's like on her bag, or the
Mhm.
camera she like puts around the house when they're
Yeah.
up in the north
Like
there.
the security stuff comes from
Yeah,
the
that
company.
she does get from the company. She just basically steals it from them. She just got, but she doesn't, she just is like, well, I just go in and borrow the stuff, but she obviously she's just stealing it. But the really high tech stuff, like the stuff she puts on there, like, you know, their electrical wires, whatever she's doing to like tap and get into their computers, like those things are she's getting on her black market friends.
From the black market. Got it.
Those are her black market friend things. So but so she does go to that dude, um, like Wasp. No, her name is Wasp. What's his name? Plague or something?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't
Plague,
remember.
I
It's
think.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Mm.
But yeah, so that's the only stuff that she gets from him. And then I think they do go and like help tap the wires at the house, don't they? Is that in the book?
They help them, that's in the book. They also help them in London, in both
Yeah,
the
that's yeah.
movie and in the book.
And in the book, yeah, because they go there to tap the line. So there's also, which I actually appreciated that change because in the book they go. I don't know if they do this in the Swedish movie, but the actual Harriet's actually in Australia, so they have to go to London, and then they have to find out from her that the real Harriet's now in Australia, and then they have to go to Australia. And by that point, I was like, it is 2:30 in the morning. I should just see this to end. Why? And so I really appreciated that the movie, when I was 2 hours and 15 minutes into it, looking, seeing another 25, I'm like, why are we going to be, got to go to Australia now? And I'm like, oh, great. We don't have to go to Australia. What a great adjustment.
Yeah, in the Swedish one, they do go to Australia to find Harriet.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's pretty quick though.
And she fortunately in the book is also a well-educated CEO millionaire, so she can take over the company.
she's been running a sheep farm for the last 30 years. What's the difference between running a sheep farm and, running a multi-billion-dollar oil conglomerate?
Or whatever they do. Yeah,
And
no,
whatever they,
absolutely.
industrial conglomerate.
Apparently,
It's like
railroads
Buster.
at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Buster Bluth when they're like, you took business classes, and he's like 18th century agrarian classes, but it's all the same. Tell me, are you worried about an uprising? So it's the same general concept.
In the movie, she's really similar to the guy in Jurassic Park, Clever Girl. I forget what his name is.
Oh yeah, Robert Muldoon, I think is the name of the character. Yeah.
Well,
But
um,
I'll say another change to Lesbeth's character in the Swedish version versus the USA version. In the USA version, her bag is stolen, and they have the scene on the escalators, and she kind of just rides the escalators in a fun way. In the 2009, it's a group of Swedish guys who are obviously in their 20s, just had a fun night out, and they're just messing with everybody. And they bump into her. She drops the bag. They start picking on her. She smashes a beer bottle and goes visceral on them. I don't think she kills them, but like it's very violent. You get more of her insanity. You can understand why she might have been in prison because of how she reacts to. Well, I mean, these guys are not being cool. Like they're messing with her, but she puts them in their place pretty violently. So that's another change I thought was a good in the Swedish version compared to the USA. I'm not sure what it was in the book.
in the book, her computer gets run over by a car. Just it's like she drops it and the car backs up onto it. So it's a lot less
Oh.
interesting. So but they needed her computer to break.
Mhm.
So
Right.
this is just the economy of film. Is like, okay, we're not just gonna have a car back over it because that's completely and utterly worthless to us. We have to do something with it. So they certainly made it a bit more interesting in the movie. Now in the book, I think that those incidents happen, but they're only like referred to. Because I think the incident with like her smashing a beer bottle or something like that, they talk about the different fights that she's gotten in throughout, like ranging from when she was like 13 or 14 all the way up to like the recent past, where she's gotten in fights with people. So those are just kind of told as just sort of information dumps on her character. So you never actually really see the incidences. You just get told about them and they don't actually progress the story. But I think for the sake of the film, they had to break the computer for narratively. And they were like, we might as well have her go a little crazy because of it. It's certainly, that sounds like a much better one because when I saw the other one, I thought it almost sort of had this like, um, Cary Grant kind of feel to it of just like, I'm gonna steal your bag and I'm gonna chase you up the escalator and then slide down the other side. It had a little bit of this like rom-com feel, which it obviously wasn't supposed to, so it didn't quite work. It sounds like smashing a beer bottle would have been more effective.
Yeah, a part of the reason it seems why we're giving the backstory in the book is you have to see her in a trap. So it's so easy for these men who are her advocates, the people who watch her resources and whatnot, have control over her resources, to have her institutionalized because they have this history. And so it seems like the violence she had to deal with tends to be violence of men trying to assault her in some way, and so she responds violently. And the point in the book, which is not hard to pick up, is that it's not just kind of individual acts of misogyny. It's sort of a systemic problem, right? These men do this, and that just reinforces the system that allows these male advocates to have control over her resources, which then allow them to potentially prey on her as well. And so it ends up setting up the trap where she just doesn't trust authority. And it's a big part in the end. I think you also need that because, first of all, you need her in the trap so that she responds and attacks that advocate who assaults her. But it's also a big part in the end where she is absolutely not cool at all with calling the cops when you found out this person's a serial killer. And I think you need more than just, well, I want to protect Harriet, because they don't really know what happened to Harriet at that point. I mean,
Yeah,
once Mark,
I think they're still
they
sort
don't
of assuming
know.
she's dead.
Yeah,
Especially, she's definitely assuming she's dead.
yeah.
She hasn't heard that what's his name? Um,
Martin.
yeah, the evil professor from Good Will Hunting,
Yeah.
that he
The one Swedish actor in the movie. Yeah.
I did. I was as I was watching, I'm like, who is that? I'm like, he definitely played a douchebag in another movie
Yeah,
too. And I'm like,
Stellan Sarsgaard, I think his name is.
I think he might be in the MCU. I think he's
He
Natalie
is.
Portman's dad in the MCU.
Or her
So,
professor. I don't think he sire. I think he's
oh, not dad. Yeah,
like her
professor. Yep, yep.
dissertation advisor, which
Yeah,
is
Thor's girlfriend's advisor.
and he's in they used him to fill my favorite plot hole that I this is one of those moments I still remember leaving, like seeing Pirates of the Caribbean and being like, so Will Turner's dad is still tied to a cannon at the bottom of the ocean, right? And he's just been sitting there for the last like 20 years until that curse like got solved, and then he just imploded. Seriously, that guy is like, it's just when I saw that movie, we laughed. I'm like, that was ridiculous. And then they used him, and then they have but that actor plays the his dad in the
Yeah.
next movie.
Stellan Skarsgård. Yeah,
Bootstraps, right?
yeah. He's been around for 50 years or something
He's a
like
good
that.
actor. I actually
Yeah.
kind of I like him.
Yeah,
He's
he's also
pretty.
the sire of the Skarsgård family. There's a bunch of them now. I think four of his kids are actors.
Hmm.
His son is Pennywise in the new It. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Oh, good
yeah,
for wow. Hmm.
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Um,
But anyway, so when evil, I can't remember where I was saying evil Goodwill Hunting
Martin,
Professor
yeah,
Dude. Yeah, I don't remember. Martin, thank
yeah.
you.
When he
Um,
dies, she doesn't know
Yeah, she
yet.
doesn't know. She just assumes that he killed Harriet. She doesn't know that he didn't. Only Blumquist knows it because he got so upset when he couldn't tell him who had killed her.
Yeah, and so it's like you need that reason to be like, if the cops come, I'm gone. And I think in the later books, it has something to do with her identity related to her father. It gets a little silly, it seems like, in later books. But whatever, within the context of this one book, we need a reason for her who would be so happy to see these men's reputations ruined for what they did to be absolutely like, no, no, we're not reporting this. We can't have cops here. So I think you need that kind of that kind of stuff going on. Um, well, in the movie, does she find out pretty quickly? You don't really get that kind of. She doesn't go like, no, we can't call the cops, right? We don't. She
Not in
doesn't.
the book, no. In the movie, no. They
Yeah,
just wake up and he never
mm,
even mentions it. He never even
yeah,
says like, "Oh, we should call the cops." It's
mhm.
just they just never comes up.
Which is
Whereas in the book, it's like very clear. Like she drags him back. He's like, "We need to call the cops." She's like, "Absolutely not." Then she goes back to the scene of the crime, wipes the entire thing, steals all of his binders of murdered and videotapes of murdered women, and burns them all. So it's like there's a very like
it's very different. Yeah.
yeah, it's very different. Like she is actively making sure that Martin never gets blamed for the murders.
Hmm. Yeah, which is a little weird, and it's disappointing. Eventually, they sort of justify it by saying Harriet would be
It would ruin the
protective.
magazine, and it would ruin the magazine.
Yeah, I think for Salander though, and even for Bloomquist, it's about protecting Harriet, right? I mean, I don't think that man.
No, because she says it. She's like, the Salinger character says she's like, you can't be known as like, because they keep making fun of him with some clear name that's a reference to a Swedish story that I don't know.
Mhm,
Because
Carl,
he,
for some reason, yeah.
yeah, because she says, well, I'd get really upset if you called me Pippi Longstockings. I'm like, okay, that reference I get.
Mhm.
And she's like, yeah, well, you shouldn't call me Laurel or whatever name it
Yeah.
was. Then I'm like, I have no idea what that's a reference to. But apparently it's some children's story that people make fun of Blumquist.
Mhm.
And they were like, you don't want to become, the sexually assaulted man who got tied up kind of story. That'll ruin your career as a journalist. She says that to him.
Yeah, it's really unconvincing though. At
But
one
she
point,
says
she,
it.
yeah, I know. At one point, she does say, you can pick between publishing this and possibly really hurting Harriet, or just sort of giving up that sort of particular journalistic ethic and protecting Harriet. Because Harriet could go to prison for murdering her father. Now, that seems unrealistic because she was clearly defending herself against a rapist, and it was also, it's 30 years ago where, but I think the idea is kind of like we need a reason why these people won't report this, which I didn't find that convincing at all. And I think speaking to
I found your argument to be the most convincing that it's that she doesn't want to do it because she doesn't like authority. She doesn't report her rape, she doesn't report anything. She does not report authority. She handles the things in her own way, which within the context of the story makes a lot of sense.
yeah, yeah, which is part of his point, right? That this is the only way these women can kind of get any kind of justice is basically by being a superhero, which is what her hacking is. It's a superpower that she can use. Um, so yeah, that that the ending then ends up not being very interesting, and the fact that it goes back into, so it's an envelope story. We end with the trial again, and the revelation that this man is again the man who's trying to put Bloomquist in prison, and in the book he succeeds, in the movie he didn't. I don't know, does he succeed in the Swedish movie, KJ?
Yeah, in the Swedish movie, the equivalent of Daniel Craig or Bloomquist goes to prison. It looks really nice. It looks nicer than most
They
college
make that joke.
dorms.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
they
make
Yeah.
do.
that joke. Yeah, I mean, they say he's like, oh, it was like a vacation. I just sat and I got to write my whole time, and I got some workout time, and all I had to do was clean a gym every once a day. Like,
Yeah.
Um, Another big change. I know we're talking envelopes here, so this doesn't quite fit. But another big change is in the 2009 one, Wagner does not offer dirt on the libel guy. He just
Oh,
offers
oh,
money. It's
yeah,
just
that's
money.
weird.
Unless
yeah.
I missed it, but it's just
Anger.
money.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the movie, while he's in prison, the girl with the dragon tattoo, Lesbeth, digs up the information
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
then he
that's a
gets
big
out and yep.
yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, because in the book and the American movie, it's similar where it's like they get the information. It's slightly different reasons it's not very good,
Hmm.
but one, it's like the statute of limitations ran out. The other one, it's like, well, this isn't useful. I can't use this. But the information that he gives is sort of he was being disingenuous in the beginning. He offers them, to give him information that will bring down the libel dude, and the information Blomquist gets in the end is sort of just mediocre at best. He can't use it. And so then Salander comes out and says, I have tons of information. I've been hacking him for weeks.
Hmm. Yeah, and then I'm guessing in the Swedish version, did they do the whole blonde? She becomes blonde and robs him of his money, and then leaves him kind of destitute, so that he gets shot in Spain.
I don't remember that. I was surprised in the American version. Now I'm kind of getting them confused now. They did something. You know what it was? They really quickly show you, I think, a black and white security footage, and I thought it was the redhead that he was dating.
Hmm.
But then he like smiles and says, "Lisbeth." Like that silly Lisbeth is going and doing all this. So yes, they do, but it's I didn't know it was blonde until I watched the American version. If I'm remembering all this correctly.
Yeah, which is fine, but they go back at the end and deal with that. Which I guess is okay. It's just not that interesting. I don't find that main character very compelling. I liked the Daniel Craig version of him, of Mikhail. Um, I think they tone him down a bit. He's not this uber sexy, like perfect man who's everybody's falling over, but seems kind of like a douche to me when I read him in the book. I think Daniel Craig's a lot nicer. They cut a few of the sexual relationships out
He
of the
just keeps
book.
having sex with random women. And again,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he would have slept with that coffee shop lady if he'd had a chance.
Yeah.
Like that coffee shop lady was
Yeah.
eyeing him a lot. And then she gets upset when Salander shows up because she's like, oh, you're sleeping with a younger woman. I'm not going to sleep with you now. And I'm like, well, why were you going to sleep with him anyway? Why is everyone sleeping with this man who admits he has a pot belly? He's like, yeah, I'm like 40 and I have a pot belly. And I'm like, then why is everyone
Jumping up.
why?
Yeah.
So Daniel Craig can drive. The Bloomquist cannot drive in the Swedish version. He's got to get a ride everywhere. He's stuck unless he Ubers or whatever the equivalent was in 2009.
Yeah.
I don't remember if that's true or not.
Yeah, I don't
No,
really.
he definitely does. No, because he gets a car because he drives the car when they're in Australia.
Oh,
He
that's
definitely
right.
can
He
drive.
and he has somebody else's car too at one point that he's free to
Yeah, he definitely
use.
can drive. I wonder why they
Yeah.
added that detail.
Oh.
Like, why change that? I guess because it makes him. I wonder if they're trying. Because I mean, again, they're trying to clearly like play with sort of role like reversal things because it makes him dependent. I'm assuming they're trying to do that where it's just sort of, they're trying to play with they're definitely playing with concepts of dependency. And they're trying to play with the idea of individuals being dependent on other individuals, sometimes just as simple as, well, I don't have a license, so I need someone to give me a ride. And other times it's, just sort of sadomasochistic relationships where it's just or just pure masochism, just or sadism. So an individual literally being dependent on someone to not murder them because they have them tied up and handcuffed. So I think they're definitely playing with that. So the idea, it's actually kind of clever. I think that's actually a good change for the Swedish movie to have. It's
Yeah,
a good
I
way to
agree.
subtly play with that idea of dependency.
It also makes
Hmm.
him more isolated. He's
Yeah,
kind of
Mhm.
stuck in that little cottage unless he makes a
really
phone
want to be
call.
in that cottage.
They also do a big scene where it's like, we got to go here. And she has the bike, and he's like, we're going to go on that. And she's like, yeah, get on. So then they have to go on the bike.
Yeah, I guess there's a little gender
You'll
reversal.
have to toss me.
But
It's
that's a
just
yeah,
like, you'll have to drive me.
No one
It's
tosses a
like,
Daniel Craig.
no
uh,
one drives Daniel Craig. It's just-
oh God. Well, I guess that idea you're saying about of dependency makes sense in terms of this sort of ending with the kind of financial thing, like all of Sweden is, because you get this sense at the end that once this guy who who Bloomquist libeled, that once he goes down, everybody's worried the stock market of Sweden is going to crash. And he's kind of like, no, it's going to be fine. Like this doesn't matter. You have this kind of false dependency. You're on this guy or on this system, and it's really irrelevant. Now, whether that's true or not is a different story. But maybe that's where that kind of connection comes in, like you were saying, Pat, of dependency.
I just like that. I particularly like that as a storytelling technique because it doesn't hit you over the head. Like the book does suffer from that. It hits you over the head over and over and over again. And it's, the fact that essentially, and again, there's even sort of the same language gets used when Salander is handcuffed and tied and being raped is a very similar language that's sort of used when Blomquist is handcuffed and, about to be, sort of raped and murdered. So it's clearly those scenes are being set up in parallel. Like there's no subtlety that's there. But I just think that's such a nice subtle twist. Like not having a license, completely and utterly believable. Completely, a man who grew up in a city and lived in a city his whole life that doesn't necessarily need to have a license. No reason for him to have it, and it's a totally believable and a really good subtle way to reinforce a theme. That's how you do good
Right.
good social writing, is you do things like that.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just a big, and I think this is another big problem I have with the book, is it's just a bunch of things this author doesn't seem to like that he just throws in a pile, right? Like
That's why when you
that's
said the
what's
Nazi thing,
annoying.
I didn't know he was a Nazi journalist. Like that, I'm like, oh, that's why the Nazis were there. I was
Yeah.
just like, why does he have this thing about him? Like, I get it. A lot of countries had Nazis during in
Mhm.
the 1930s and 40s, but I'm like, why is he making such a big deal of this? Like, why is this being added to this story? It doesn't, other than sort of adding in these elements of sadism and stuff like that, it doesn't really seem to add very much. And I'm like, oh, that's why he did it.
Yeah.
Because, write what you know. If that's what he was doing,
Yeah, he was
that's
in.
why he did it.
Yeah, and it's also he doesn't like these kind of large capitalists, and in the book it's much more clear he really doesn't like religion. And at one point he mentions that they don't have this in the movie. They might have this in the Swedish movie. You could tell us, KJ. But he mentions in the book that the religious group she's joining is the type of group he would have investigated years ago in the magazine. Like he would have done an expose on them, exposing them for their whatever behavior. In the movie, he's just sort of uncomfortable with religion, it seems. Like he's just sort of, when she prays before eating, he just sort of sits there uncomfortably. But it seems like that kind of religious stuff, and then it connects to the Leviticus readings and that kind of weird religious ranting that the rapists do, and how that connects to the way they murder people or the way Gottfried murders people anyway. All of that just seems very, very loosely connected, and it speaks to these kind of preconceived notions he has, which is a really, really bad way to do social problem work, right? It's a really bad, just take things I don't like and and say they're all equivalent and put them in a pile and not necessarily draw the connections or draw out the ironies of why these things are a problem or connected, is another difficulty with social problem writing that I think he does quite poorly, and it's very frustrating. Um, yeah, but oh, that's right, KJ. He doesn't have a daughter in the Swedish version, right?
I don't think so. They might mention that Harriet's kind of doing some of that stuff, joining a religious
Well, they
situation.
do it in the book, but they think she's joining religious things,
Which
but
is
she's
not.
actually just trying to research the murders her father is doing.
Yeah, because they think she's becoming a Catholic, and at one point they go to
Which
the
at that, which
pastor.
they're like, very, he really doesn't like. He
Yeah,
doesn't like Catholics.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But he goes to the like a pastor, a Lutheran pastor, and they're like, oh no, she's reading the Apocrypha books and blah blah blah, and so they think she's becoming a Catholic, but she's just she's not doing anything like that. She's just trying to figure out what her father was talking about.
But the Nazi stuff was more pronounced in the Swedish movie.
Oh,
The
really?
the before he goes into Martin's house and gets captured in the basement, he breaks into the grandfather's house. The grandfather aims a shotgun at him and is like kind of showing him his Nazi stuff, and then
Is he
Martin,
like, do you want to see my dad has a Nazi plate? And then he's like, you
yeah,
should see my Nazi plate. That's
yeah,
is it
Hmm.
that's American Beauty. That's what I was
it was
Oh.
stuff like that. He was like getting it. Maybe
right? I
they
mean, that
lifted
was
it from America. I
Mm.
didn't catch the reference, but it was stuff like that. He was kind of showing him, and he actually fires the gun. And at the last minute, Bloomquist, how do you say it?
Bloomquist, I think.
Bloomquist pushes the gun out of the way, and he like loses. He gets shot a second time. Right, he gets
yeah, no,
shot
that does
once
not.
in the
That's in
hunting.
neither.
No, he only gets shot once in the book, in the American movie.
I suspect I mean, I suspect it's just like for Swedish, for Americans, it's sort of, and maybe this is to Tom's point. I think if you put all the Nazi stuff that's maybe, and maybe this is why maybe it's less cartoony in sort of a Swedish culture because if you add the Nazis on top in the American version, I don't know if to an American audience it would get a bit over the top.
Mhm.
It would start feeling like what's the movie with the is it secret? Is it safe? What's that one with the dentist and the
Fellowship of the
Oh,
Rings.
no, no, no. Is it Marathon Man?
Marathon Man? Yeah,
Mm.
no, the Marathon Man. Yeah, is it secret? Yeah, is it? But
Is it safe?
is it safe? It would
Mm.
have that sort of Marathon Man feel to and so I don't know if that's why in the American version it gets cut out. But again, if especially for some of these, and maybe this is the point he's sort of is making, and this is slightly more subtle, is that a lot of these Nordic countries and these Nordic noir things, part of the idea is like we have such a good culture, we take care of everybody, and we have all these social programs to make sure everybody has like these kind of things, and yet it's like, yeah, but 80 years ago most of you were Nazis. So I don't know if
Mm.
that's his why he's inserting it in there is that
Mhm.
most of the country would like to forget, and he's sort of making sure that it's like, you do, 80 years is not that long.
Mhm. Oh, I
This
think it's
is
definitely what he's doing.
but that's why I think it might be a little less cartoony for a that audience, that it might come across as a little less cartoony because it is there. I agree. He is taking all these things and he's lumping them all together and he's pushing them all together, and it's not effective as a social story, as a social problem kind of exploration. But I think at least that's what he's trying to do. And he's trying to make that point very clearly that 80 years ago is not that long.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
really isn't. I mean, I'm trying to convince my kids of that. I'm like, even my kids will be like, the Civil War was a long time ago. I'm like, you got to remember, like, my father met Civil War veterans. Like, it's not you are within living memory of Civil War.
Mhm.
Like, it's not that long. Like, history is surprisingly short. So 80 years for someone to be like, we got rid of all of that. It's like, no, you didn't. So
Yeah.
that if he did that a little more subtly, it might work.
Yeah, the actual American version I think does it more subtly, which is they meet one
Yes,
of
that was good.
that was a great scene. There's this
That was a
one
great scene.
scene, remember this, KJ, in the American version where they meet one of the uncles. He's not involved in the case, but they go in there. In the book, it's not in the book, but they
Mhm.
go in there and the guy's there and he kind of invites them in. He's like, sit down. Do you want to see my photographs? In the book, they need his photographs, but they don't have this scene. And there's just pictures of this guy and in Nazi uniforms. He was
And of all the people, he's the most polite.
yeah, he's the
This
most
is when you actually pull off social problem plays
yeah.
because you set up the irony that the most polite person that he meets on this island, the one who treats him the kindest, who doesn't shout at him, who doesn't tell him to go away, all his stuff, is the Nazi. And all the Nazi wants to do is show him all the photos. He's just like, take a look at my photos, look at all my stuff. Like, look at aren't these cool? Like, isn't this great? And he says, he's like, he says, like, well, they all want to forget. And he goes, you mean your family? And he goes, no, Sweden.
Yeah. That's
It's just this idea of like they all want to forget that this is here. I'm still here though. Look at all my pictures. Like that was a really, really good touch.
yeah, and it's not in the book, and it's yeah, and I think it works so well because because it's made by Americans for an international audience, right? I think that's we get to kind of look in on the society that I think a lot of Americans also, as you're saying, Pat, see as ideal. A lot of people will see Sweden, Norway, Denmark as this kind of ideal place. And like you're saying, that they were they're far greater percentage of them were Nazis than Americans were. Now, part of that is location. They were in that place where that would happen. But there
To be
are
fair, Norway is also occupied, so we'll give
yeah,
Norway a
yeah,
little. We'll give
yeah.
Norway a
A
little bit
little
of
more.
we'll give them a
Yeah, yeah.
little bit more.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, I know, I
But
get it.
but literally Norway as the origins of the word Quisling
Mhm.
certainly are that there's a lot of Quislings. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, that was a very nice touch.
So I had two things I wanted to bring up. One's kind of small, but one it's a question for you guys. So the first thing, in both movies they show a thermometer, and it's somewhere between -2 and -3 degrees Celsius. And I did the math.
That's
I
not that
googled it.
cold.
It's 28 degrees. That's not that bad. Like,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, to
I
go down
think
to
in the
negative
book,
30.
in the book, they specifically say Fahrenheit and they say 0 to -5 Fahrenheit. Now that's cold.
That's cold. And
Mhm.
Yes.
-20 is not warm, right? Water's freezing. It's just it's a cold day.
I
It's not.
thought,
-2 is not cold. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Like,
right.
yeah,
I
I
love that. My ideal temperature is between 20 and 30, so
mhm,
that's not cold. Like,
mhm,
-5 degrees Fahrenheit is chilly. Like,
That's
that's getting
yes. That's
that's
mhm.
pushing
you're
it.
getting dangerous at -5 Fahrenheit.
That's when you start getting my favorite thing I've ever heard when we had them here last winter, ice quakes. So when
Yes.
it starts getting that cold, when it happens quickly, the groundwater actually freezes, like the water under the ground, and it's because it expands, it causes these mini
Wow.
explosions. So like you get really cool stuff like that. But yes, in the book, it's very specifically made clear it's Fahrenheit.
Okay. Well, unless I misread both thermometers. I thought it was Celsius. All right, but here's my
They
bigger
Yeah, they
question.
might have just messed it up.
So, season 2 adapted. We're doing detective stories, which I've been very unfamiliar with, but I've been coming along with you guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks,
But
I love it.
yeah, I know. So we started with Sherlock. We moved on to these different German expressionists, all these different movements, and then Chandler, and then they're sick of it, give crimes back to the criminals. And now we're in a cold space. Did I miss a movement or two? I'm having trouble connecting
No,
this.
it kind of stops.
Okay.
I mean, I think the last one we did, when we did the sunny spaces, the thing with the sunny spaces is, and I kind of had discussed this, is like a lot of this movement is now just so overdone that it's just blown into parody. And so many of them you have to do something different because, and I think that's sort of what's going on with that version of the Long Goodbye that we did. You almost have to do that, or you end up doing parodies of this kind of stuff. In the last, I would say, 15 or 20 years, other cultures and sort of things have started to use the genre for their own means. And Nordic noir is the most prominent of them all because it actually is doing what we've been saying. Like the idea of Nordic noir is to take a society that on the surface looks really good and to explore the sort of seedy, sort of underside of it and to sort of blow up that perception of it. So it has a social aspect to it. So that's been a truly new direction that's not parody or sort of undercutting or taking the genre and doing a different style, like Mulholland Drive. You take the genre and you do it in a surrealistic style, something like that. This is, I would argue, Nordic noir is one of the first times in a long time that somebody's taken the actual genre, treated it very seriously, and done something truly new with it. So I think that's why we chose.
That's great. No, that makes a lot more sense. I like that a lot. You're kind of saying it was finished, it was done, it ran its natural course, and now other perspectives are picking it up and using it as a different narrative tool
Yeah.
for. Yep,
I
that's
think
great.
the last one we're gonna do is also an example of that because other
Yeah.
people do this. Like we're not gonna do that because did anybody make a of the New York books? Did anybody
There
make a
was
movie of that?
one thing I considered, they made a graphic novel of it,
Oh, they did.
of
Okay,
the first one, of City of Glass, which I think is pretty good. It's a pretty good graphic novel.
I
Um,
haven't seen the graphic novel, but so like those books are books. There's people have taken them and done sort of things like postmodernism with it,
mhm.
and that's our last one we're gonna do. So I didn't know if I knew we weren't gonna do the New York ones, but they're called the New York Mysteries. The New York Mysteries, the
The
New
New
York
York
Trilogy,
Trilogy,
New
I
York
think,
Trilogy.
by
Um,
Paul Auster, which
yeah,
is
They're
I
weird.
liked them. They're
They're
weird.
good, but they
I
are
think I
really
have a
weird.
reading of the first one at least, but anyway,
But
um,
if you have to read a book and have a mystery story and have a reading of it, it's a it's a bit strange. But
mhm,
sort of where I think the last one we're going to do is Name of the Rose, and Name of the Rose is a postmodern mystery. Like
mhm.
that's when they sort of are just like we are going to take this genre and totally blow it up and do really weird stuff with it. So that's when they just sort of blow up the genre and make totally new things of it. But I think Nordic noir is the truly the only real movement in the last 40 years that treats it seriously and has done something new with it.
And you could say another new movement in it is the psychopath, which is something that has evolved maybe post 1950 is when you have, and I think Robert Bloch is a big is
The
responsible
Killer
for this.
Inside Me is the first one of those. The Killer Inside Me is the
Yeah.
first one. Really,
Ki-
the first
Um,
real serious one.
mhm. And well, the most famous early one is probably Psycho, right? Where you have the
Killer Inside Me is before Psycho.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it is,
okay.
yeah.
hmm who's the killer inside me? That's
Can't remember his name.
oh, I can't remember the author. Okay,
But The Killer Inside Me, I think, is before that. The Killer Inside
yeah,
Me, I think, is the first true major psychopathic killer story.
and I think that's something new, but it's not something. It sort of follows the same model.
Yeah, I
Um,
would say it's still there. Like I don't think that's it's a derivation maybe, but I don't think it's sort of a spin-off. I wouldn't say it's taking the genre and like true noir. I mean, Nordic noir, this has the femme fatale. It has all those attributes that you traditionally associate with a noir, and yet it's actually doing something different.
Who would you say is the femme fatale in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo?
Well, it's in the book. It's the woman across the street that he sleeps with. She's like again, this is where the family tree would be helpful, Tom.
Her
She's
name is
the
the
niece,
cousin.
aunt, cousin of
Ah, the one that looks like her and the priest gets confused. No, she
no,
was in Scotland,
she's
I thought.
just like I can't
It's not
remember which
her.
one she
It's
is.
Cecilia, right?
I can't
It's
remember. Her dad's a
Cecilia.
Nazi, but in this family, it doesn't narrow it down.
Yeah, her dad is
Um,
Harold, who was all the two Nazis were Richard and Harold. And then Cecilia is the sister of Berger, the guy who kind of is really pompous but can't run anything.
Berger isn't in the movie, I don't think.
He's not in the movie, or maybe I think he's in the movie, but I don't think you meet him. I think he's just sitting there when,
See, this is my point about how they just you can take so many of these
yeah.
characters and flop them and move them around. But there is one of the family members who's a school mistress who's in her 50s and lives across the street. And basically, this is where I just say like everybody just wants to have sex with Blomquist. She basically invites him over and is like, "I haven't had sex in 3 years. Do you want to have sex?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And then they just start sleeping together for like a couple months while he's living on this island. And then the editor woman who is the editor of the magazine shows up, and then he sleeps with her. And then the woman across the street is like, "Well, I guess I'll just have to accept that you guys are sleeping together, and I'll sleep with you when you're done with him." I'm like, this is not how that would work. Um, so
Mhm.
the woman across the street though is set up as the femme fatale. You think she's going to be a much bigger deal, and he thinks she's the one that was in the window when he like sees the photo. They blend some of the characters. They kind of merge some of the characters, but he thinks she's the one that was in the window, and there's like a whole thing about it. But it's clearly the she's meant to be the character you think is the femme fatale, and you think, and you know, again, he's subverting the expectation a little bit there because she actually turns out to be relatively unimportant.
Mhm. Yeah, she's not that important. And she's also you also find out she's up to that point fairly prudish.
Yeah.
She actually doesn't have a lot of sexual experience except this man is just so
Yeah, she
magnetic.
says, yeah, because she says she's like, I sleep with lots and lots of men, so you're just be another one to it. And then like after she's been sleeping with like 2 or 3 months, she's like, actually, I never sleep with anybody. And then I'm like, why is everybody sleeping with man?
Yeah.
A man who admits he has to go for an hour walk a day to work on his pot belly. Like, why are they with this man?
This overweight felon, this
Yeah.
overweight middle-aged felon. Nobody can keep their hands off of him. Uh, yeah, that's a good. Yeah, and that is something. Maybe we should give the book credit for this. I think the book does, as much as it is sort of referencing and even directly referencing early murder mysteries. Dorothy L. Sayers' work they reference directly. it is fairly subversive in terms of the genre. There's this locked door mystery, locked room mystery, and they really leave the island quite a lot. They go all over the place. It doesn't seem to be a thing. As you're saying, Fat, there's this femme fatale who turns out not to be a femme fatale in any way whatsoever. There's the lawyer who's a possible suspect who, turns out to be really nothing at all. And it turns out there's not even a murder. Like the murder is she's alive and she's fine. Um,
That's why I just think that's why I agree with your problems of the social problems of the play. It's totally true. It's a bad grafting, but the story itself is good. I think the story itself is really well done. If he had left those elements in there without putting all the stuff and just hammering you with
mhm,
it, it would have been a lot more effective. And if he'd done a scene like again, if I think the movie did it really brilliantly, if everybody on that island treats him like garbage except the Nazi, when he finally meets the Nazi, and that's the one person who treats him kindly and really is very kind and helps him, and tries to do the best, that's when you're like, man, there's a problem with us all.
mhm.
There,
Yeah.
if that's the one who's going to treat me nicely, what does it say about the rest of us? Like that's when you get an interesting social problem play. And this is why, like, I remember when I was doing my MFA and I used to like read, we used to have to read people's stories and write comments on them, and I'm like, I used to always say, I'm like, I used to be like, lean again. If you have a character you don't like, lean against it as much as you possibly can. Because if you just make them look bad, that's boring. But if you make them look good and they do bad things, then you're like, oh, man, I don't know what to do with this. Like, this really now challenges how I'm supposed to expect this, or like how I'm supposed to approach this work. So if they had done that with this, it could have been really, really good. As it stands, it's a really good story, and there are elements, it sounds like, especially some of if you take some of the Swedish movie and you take some of the American movie and you take the book and you sort of wrote something from that, you could make something really interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I just want to say, because I realized as I was reading this and as I watched the movie, I just have like, and I really like these movies that do what this movie does and what this book do, which is I really like the idea of mysteries that took place 40, 50 years ago, and people have to put them together from photos and archives and interviews. I don't know why. I don't know if this is like, I really like the idea of connecting the past to the present and ultimately to the future, that there's sort of this contiguous, that they're all sort of connected together, and this is like a really cool way to explore that. And like some of my favorite kind of, I was thinking about it, and like some of my favorite movies, it's often horror genre does this to some extent. Like I was thinking like The Ring. This is like this reminded me a lot of The Ring, just in terms of like how they're going about it, and they're trying to find this, like, what happened to this girl, and piece together this sort of, it has a horror element to it. Or, in writing, it was like Rebecca, the
Hmm.
book Rebecca, which I know, what's his name? Um,
Hitchcock.
Hitchcock did that, very famous rendition. I've never seen that one, but he's done, like that kind of stuff. I'm like, I really like this style of writing. Like I just really like these types. Like, there was the Woman in Black, that one with that Daniel Radcliffe did. It was like his when he
I
was
didn't
first trying to,
see that, but I've heard
I
of it.
saw it. It wasn't good, but I still like that idea. I just like the idea. Apparently, it was like a play at first, and it was like a really creepy play, which makes sense because the movie is essentially just Daniel Craig wandering around a room, getting things being thrown up at him. And I'm like, oh, if this was a play, that would be really scary effect, because I would wonder how they did it. But in a movie, I know they did 37 shots to get that thing to fall where it did. But those kind of things of people having to piece together events and mysteries from past things, I find just a really, really cool storytelling thing.
Yeah,
So that was
Turn of
that
the
was awesome.
Screw does it too, and you never get the
Yes, Turn of
story,
the Screw. Yep.
which is what's great about Turn of the Screws. You don't get you never get the actual thing that happened because the narrator is so unreliable.
And that's
Uh,
true. Turn of the Screw is one of my favorite books, and The Innocents, the movie, is one of my favorite
yeah,
movies.
that is a very
Like,
good
and
movie.
those I love. I hadn't actually real because I was thinking about movies I really like and books I really like, and I realized I really like that theme. I really, or that genre. Like, I really like that approach to a story, of
Mm,
trying to piece together things like that. I thought it was just interesting seeing this and realizing how much I enjoy that, and that might have colored my appreciation of the novel a bit. So.
a bit more, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, fair. I think I liked it a lot less than you, but
I just didn't. I agree that the social aspects are bad, but I
doesn't
think the
work.
story is good. If
The
they had
story is
just
good. The main character I struggled with. I really didn't like him either. So that's even outside of the social
But
aspect.
I have no problems with that. If you really dislike the main character, again, I don't mind really disliking a main character if you lean into it in other ways. Again, he
Hmm.
can't sleep with every single woman that he sees, and every single woman
But
can't look at him with
this
fiery
writer
eyes or
isn't
whatever the
doing
phrase is.
anything with it. He's not doing
But that's
anything
the
with
thing is
the.
he would need to redo it. I think he needed an editor and a
Hmm,
second draft, but he
hmm.
died.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Fair enough. So I guess we'll end on this note of giving Mr. Larson the benefit of a doubt because he's
And all
dead.
the millions and millions of dollars his estate has made off of his books. So I mean, you can't say we didn't do something right.
If you enjoyed The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and are looking for more works about these characters, check out the Swedish sequels, The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, as well as the continuation of the series, the book continuation of the series by David Lagerkrantz. And I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the more recent, The Girl in the Eagle's Talons by Karen Smirnoff. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss Patricia Highsmith's stories, including Ripley's Game, Strangers on a Train, The American Friend, and more.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing Ripley's Game. Pat, if you could adapt Ripley's Game into any medium, what would it be?
I feel like we're just getting further and further off base with our adaptations. They become
Yeah.
like business ideas vaguely related to the topic.
They're no longer funny, they're actually serious
Yeah,
considerations
they're serious. Yeah,
by
it's like,
the
okay,
end.
how could we market this thing in the modern age? So I have two. I would say I think actually I'm gonna go with like Ripley's Task Monkey. So it's like you can hire Tom Ripley to do something for you and hope that he doesn't end up murdering someone in order to accomplish his tasks. Because it seems like he'll often try to do something sort of semi above board, just illegal without murder, and it always seems like he just ends up having to murder someone because his idea doesn't work. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Ripley's Task Monkey, where you hope he doesn't murder someone in the process. What about you, KJ?
Well, we used to ask about crossovers, and that's going to be an easier one for me this week. So if I was to crossover, um, The American Friend is the name of the movie. I guess, what is it? The Talented Mr. Ripley's Game?
The Talented Mr. Ripley is the first one, and The American Friend is based on two books, Ripley Underground and Ripley's Game.
Okay, Ripley's Game. So I want to cross over that with other Dennis Hopper movies because I know him more as either Bowser or the villain from Waterworld. So I want to take Ripley's Game but put it in Waterworld.
Mhm.
So maybe it's not a train that they're on all the time; it's a boat. But they're murdering. They're still framing artwork at sea, and the whole 9 yards. But I just a crossover of maybe Kevin Costner can play the framer.
This is just like Speed 2, only with a bus instead of
How about you, Tom? This is devolving quickly.
It is. I actually have a decent business idea. It's called Ripley's Signature, we see Ripley becomes very good at faking people's signatures, and I thought, since we have to do so much online documentation, what if there was an online software where you can upload your signature, and then you get to save it on the computer, and it has an authentic signature that you could put onto PDFs and other documents you have to sign.
I think that's just called Adobe Acrobat. It
It
does that. It
So-
does that.
Okay, wait. Let's save this.
Did
How
I
about
just
better yet?
invent Adobe Acrobat?
Better yet. Better yet. You email your document to Ripley. He prints it out, does your signature perfectly, and then delivers it wherever it has to go. With Pat's idea, murdering some people along the way, maybe even the people that need the document. You have to start over.
So if he's
Very
murdering
good.
people along the way, then it just becomes like the postman, basically, right?
Oh, that'd be a fun crossover too. All right, we're mixing the Postman
Waterworld.
world and Ripley's game.
Oh God! So this is going to turn into the great Kevin Costner disasters of the
This is
90s?
it. AI's
This
got
is it.
nothing on us. If we're coming up with this, what's AI gonna come up with?
It's nothing. Yeah, AI is
Yeah.
a joke. Yes.